welcome back to my channel. Yee! Today I'm really excited to bring you another prop tutorial. And this one specifically for Roxy's staff from the anime Mushoku Tensei. And the best part about it is I've made it so it comes apart in 4 pieces for transportation. And I'll be going over that in this video. So let's get started. And here's all the tools and materials you'll need for making your own staff, and I'll have links to all of this in the description, as well as a link to my blueprint for helping you make it. And to first start off, let's talk about the main bone structure for this staff. And I'm going to be using size 1-inch CPVC pipe, and with the help of my blueprint, I segmented it into 4 pieces, the length that I knew would fit in my suitcase for travel, and then I marked it and cut it into those sections using a pipe cutter. And in order for this to assemble back together, we're gonna need one more size of CPVC pipe, and this is gonna be size 3/4 inch. And this one is gonna be our male piece, which we are going to cut into 3 pieces this time. I did around 4 to 5 inches long, and this is the piece that we're going to be into one side of each of the larger pipes and epoxying in place. This is what is going to be the male end that is going to insert later on into the opposite female end and make it so we can assemble all 4 of the parts to make one staff. And as a helpful tip, remember to rough up each of these pipes, the smaller ends, before applying your epoxy with sandpaper. This way your epoxy has something to grip onto and it won't just come off. And once that's done, put all of those pieces to the side to dry for at least 24 hours before working with them. Yeah. And now let's start focusing on foam fabrication parts. And all of these ringlets that I cut out are going to be 10mm HD foam. And these are going to be what we're using for all of the decorative parts on the staff, as well as for the bottom cone shape that the pipe will be inserting into. And I will note that I used my laser cutter to cut out all these circles because I hate cutting circles. But there is another way you can do this without a laser cutter, and those tools I highly recommend because I use these all the time before I got my laser cutter are Costools circle cutter as well as Costools hole drills. The hole drills, you will use the inner part of the circle that you're going to cut out, and for the circle cutter is what you're going to be using to cut the larger circles out, and you'll need to do this a bunch of times. So I highly recommend investing in those tools to help with you. I'll do links in the description. And then next, we're going to be applying contact cement glue to some of these ringlets in order to stack them the height that we need. And for this, we're actually doing the very bottom section first, which ended up being 6 stacked circle pieces of the 10mm foam. So in this, all of the black ones I did with the hole cut out of the center, which will be the same outer circumference of our pipe, which is 1 inch. And then the very bottom one was just a solid circle. And I glued all of these pieces in a stack together. And in order for them not to look like a bunch of stacked pieces of foam with lines, I wrapped it in 2mm foam. Then grab the bottom section of our bone structure, whichever piece that is for you. Mark how high up this thing is gonna sit, and then we're gonna apply our contact cement glue to the pipe. And this time, while the glue is still wet, you're going to slide on that piece all the way up and then hold it in place a little bit so that way it can harden and dry. Typically, we don't do this with contact cement glue, but this is the best option for moving pieces on a pipe. And let's continue moving up the pipe. And for this stuff, there is a decorative kind of cage-like thing. And for this, I recommend cutting out the main pieces out of 4mm foam and then cutting out the line segments also with 4mm foam. And I've included in my blueprint a pattern for this piece. So make sure to follow those lines. And on this pattern part, there are guidelines down the center that I have indicated as score lines. These score lines we're actually going to be doing on the inside part of this piece. And you're going to want a very sharp X-Acto knife. And at a 45, we're going to cut down all of those guidelines in one direction, and then we're going to rotate the piece the opposite way, 180 degrees, and then we are going to cut down at a 45 again in that same direction following the guideline. This will leave it where there is a triangle-like shape of foam that you'll be able to remove, and then your foam will bend nicely in that angle. Then apply your contact cement glue to each of the inseams and glue them together, so you should have 2 parts. And then attach the top to the bottom. A little helpful trick is that you may need to lightly sand these 2 pieces where they are going to touch flat, as when you bend the foam, sometimes they will pop upward more, and you want to have a nice clean seam when attaching these together. Then for the last part of this is to attach our lattice-like work, and these are going to be onto all of our pointed edges. So apply your glue there, wait for it to dry, and then attach the parts together to complete your little cage doohickey thingy. I don't know what it's called. And now that that's done, we can continue moving up the staff. And this piece that the cage thingy that we just made is going to attach to is the very top part of our staff. And for me, this was the smallest piece. And there are some other decorative ringlets that are going to attach to here. So first I marked where these were going to attach and applied contact cement glue. And while the glue was still wet, slid the ringlets into place and waited for them to dry. Then, on the opposite side of this piece, I slid the cage-like thing halfway, so I kind of roughly knew where it was going to sit, and then applied my contact cement glue, and again, while the glue was still wet, slid it into place, and capped it with a ringlet on top. Now onto the main top part of the staff, the C-like shape. And for this, I ended up using 10mm foam for each of the parts. And I was making this costume pretty fast, so I ended up using my laser cutter, but you don't need a laser cutter to do any part of this staff. You can just cut out these pieces by hand with an X-Acto knife or a box cutter, and make sure to have a cutting mat underneath so that way you don't cut your table. And this is kind of the shape that I was going for. And for getting volume in a piece, you're going to want to cut out sections multiple times so that way you'll get a thicker piece. So imagine if you are making a cake and you want the cake to be a certain thickness, you're going to stack the layers, and then afterwards we're going to carve it into the correct shape that we want by removing parts. So in order to do that, once I got my correct thickness that I roughly wanted, I got my contact cement glue and applied it onto all of the pieces. You will want the glue to dry this time for everything. And once it's dry, then we can start stacking the layers together to get our correct height. And I did this into 3 main sections, one being the back spine, one being the bottom bulky part, and then the other being the top bulky part. The 2 bulky parts are the sections that your gems are going to be floating into. And I found by having it in these 3 sections a lot easier to work with, because then I could individually carve each of these pieces with my box cutter. Reminder, your box cutter you're going to want to be extremely sharp. So as you are cutting, make sure to go back and sharpen the blades or cut off the snappable blades and replace them. And it doesn't matter how rough it looks, just kind of get the basic shape, and then we're gonna take it to our sanding station, and with a Dremel and a sanding drum, go to town sanding them, so that way you can remove all the choppiness and make it look nice and smooth. And then once you're happy with the sanded shape, we can assemble them. And again, your contact cement glue applied to both the surfaces you want to attach together. Wait for the glue to dry, and then attach both the top and the bottom part of this to complete the foam fabrication of the top part of the staff. And the last step is going to be attaching our cage-like part to the bottom part of our C-shaped top staff thingy. A side note, I did end up carving a little bit of the foam on the C part out, so that way the pipe would insert a tiny bit and have a little bit more surface for the glue to stick to. And the last thing to talk about before we finish the fabrication on the staff is the gems. And the gems, they float! Yay, magic! We can't do magic right now, sorry. So we're gonna do an illusion, and we're gonna actually be using a clear acrylic rod. And for that, I ended up measuring the length that I wanted that it was going to go in our foam, which I then cut. And for the gems, you can make them out of foam. You can stack foam and carve them into the shape that you want. But for me, I wanted to have them made out of resin. So I ended up 3D modeling and resin printing them. And I'll have that file available on my website, link in the description. But once it was printed and I had done all the UV lights to it and everything, I ended up sliding each of the gems onto our clear acrylic rod and super gluing it into place. And that will complete all of the fabrication. But wait! We still have to do one final step to make sure that our pieces can still come together correctly. And that is where we did our smaller 3/4 inch CPVC pipe, the male ends that are gonna stick out and go inside the other part of the tube, so that way we can disassemble this piece, is you're going to want to cover it in 2mm HD foam. Reason being is the pieces you want to snugly tight fit together. Now, once this is attached to the pipe, do check to see if they fit and they aren't too tight coming together. You may need to remove a little bit of foam, and I do this by using a sanding drum and roughly just removing a little bit of the top layer until I can make sure it has a snug fit. And that will complete all of the fabrication for our Roxy staff. Now on to painting, which is actually really simple because there's like only 4 colors for this staff. So let's go. And here's all of the tools and materials that I used for this staff. Reminder, you can always hand paint this. You don't have to use an airbrush and compressor, but you know, I do have my own airbrush paint set that is perfect for cosplay props. So I highly recommend getting that because that can help you out a lot and it helps support me. But anyway, let's go. And the first step that you're gonna wanna do is mask off the clear acrylic rods with masking tape, as well as all of our male segments. You want to wrap those with masking tape as well, because we don't want any plasti dip or paint on these parts, as you want to not have any interference with them locking or getting just messy. And the first step that we're gonna be doing is actually priming all of the parts. And for this, I go to my favorite method of priming, which is Plasti Dip. And Plasti Dip is a rubber spray paint. You will want to apply it on 360 of each of the parts, and you will do this 3 times. So 3 heavy coats each, and in between each layer, wait at least 45 minutes for it to dry. And then on to painting, and I'm gonna be using a airbrush provided by Iwata, which is their HP TH2 airbrush. I love it, it's my favorite one, as well as we're gonna be using airbrush paint provided by Createx Colors. And our first coat of paint that we're gonna be using is opaque black. And we're gonna be applying this to all of the places that are gonna be black, as well as to all of the pieces that are later on gonna be silver, because the silver is then going to pop on that black color. Then once it is dry, we're going to want to mask off all of the black sections using masking tape. A little helpful tip to make sure that the masking tape doesn't rip off your paint or the plasti dip or anything is grab the masking tape and put the sticky part onto your leg and then remove it. This will make it just a tiny bit less sticky and ensure that when you remove the masking tape from your prop, it will not affect your paint. And then on to our next coat of paint, which is gonna be aluminum fine. And once again, when the paint was dry, mask off all of those silver painted sections. And then our next color that we're gonna be using is opaque cream. And for this, you're gonna basically be applying it to the rest of the staff. And I will note that I did 2 coats of this. And the last coat of paint that we're going to be using is Pearl Teal. And you can airbrush paint this color, but you will need to mask off a lot of the white parts and whatnot. And for me, I just wanted to do this by hand, so I went back up into my studio, and with a paintbrush and this airbrush paint, I ended up just hand painting it. And I did probably about 2 or 3 coats. Either way is fine, airbrush or by brush. And that's going to be our last paint color. So let's now remove all the masking tape to reveal the staff. And the very last step to complete this staff is actually going to be sealing it. And for this, we're going to be using Createx Colors UVLS Gloss. And this is a clear coat that's going to protect your paint from all of the UV lights. It's going to leave an even, consistent shine throughout the piece and just make sure that your paint stays and lasts as long as possible. It is a very important step, so make sure to do it. And that will complete the staff. Congratulations! And as I said in the beginning of this video, the staff, it comes apart in 4 pieces. And now it is really easy to transport in a suitcase, and I can fly to any convention that I want with this. And that, guys, is how I made this staff. And I really hope that this helped you for making your own staff for Roxy, or maybe just inspiration or help for making another staff for your own character that you're going to be cosplaying. But let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear back from you, as well as don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as well as like the video. A big thank you to all of my company sponsors here on YouTube, as well as those members, specifically the legendary members, as y'all are a big, huge support for me, so that way I can financially continue doing this as my full-time job and my main source of income, but bringing you more costume and prop tutorials. And I'll see you for our next video. Much love, guys.